Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, and it is Wednesday night, October the 6th. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and chat room is open if anybody's around and wants to sit in the chat room. Tonight I want to talk about psychological child abuse. And what is it? And found a good website that kind of just goes over the basics of what is psychological child abuse. It's important that we know all the different types of child abuse. If we're going to try to prevent and stop child abuse, we need to really know all the signs and symptoms and what are the different types of child abuse. And I just happened to come across this website, and I think there's some really good information here. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I don't hold any certificates in those areas. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own blog talk shows and just to be one more voice, really. I want to be one more voice just to say we need to stop child abuse. And, I figure, hey, I've got nothing better to do with my time than to try to spread awareness and education and to educate myself and other people around me about child abuse, about the issues surrounding child abuse, and how we're going to prevent it and stop it. And really, education is really the only way we're going to ever be able to stop child abuse, and that is to educate the public, really, so that they will know to look out for their own children in their own homes. We could stop a lot of child abuse that way, right? 90 to 95% of child abuse happens within the home, and it's generally somebody the child knows and trusts. So whether it's a parent or caregiver, relative, even a distant relative or close family friend, somebody the child knows and trusts, that's who's abusing children. And so it's wherever the child is. So 90 to 95% of abuse happens within the home, and the other 5 to 10% is a stranger outside the home, like child sexual predator or someone who gets a hold of your child somehow, or daycare or whatever. So this is the thing. Mainly it's in the home. And if we could get people to look out for their own children in their own homes, we could stop almost all child abuse, except for those that just think it's okay to abuse their children. But we could still stop and prevent a lot of child abuse that way, right? So it's so important that people know and understand this stuff, you know what I mean? And I'm a student at MRU. I'm just in between courses. I can't afford to go right now. And I had to stop taking courses, and unfortunately, because I was working on my certificate program, which was going to turn into a degree, I was working towards a degree, and in youth justice and child rights and whatnot. I just can't afford to go right now, so I'm still studying. I study all the time, and so I figured, hey, why stop studying? I need to keep studying because probably what I'll probably do is just test out of the courses. I'll just test out and get my degree. But the thing is I got to keep going, and so this is what I'm doing, and I just wanted to be one more voice out here speaking out against child abuse, standing up for children's rights to save children's lives, right? I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm so happy to be, let me tell you, a volunteer position. I say this almost on every show. I love it. I absolutely love it. And the reason why is because these guys are so awesome. Every single one of them is a volunteer, taking their own time and their own resources to get the word out because they care about children and they care about the fact that there are children tonight who are sadly suffering and being abused by people that have no business abusing them. There's no excuse for abuse, period. Abuse is a choice, and whether people want to admit it or agree with that it doesn't really matter. It's just a fact. Abuse is a choice. People have the choice to not abuse their children. They can make the right choice for themselves and their families and get help, but instead they don't, and they blame it on the child, and they take their own issues out on their children, and other people abuse children too, teachers and child sexual predators and whatnot, just using children, abusing children, and it's a choice. It's a choice they're making. So this is what really bothers me. And the fact is that we're all working around the clock, really, to try to do what we can to stop child abuse. And you should just wait and see what we'll be doing in the future once we get funding. We'll be going nationwide, and we'll be going North America-wide, and then worldwide. I mean, it's just going to be awesome. But until then, we're just doing what we can, right, to be another voice out here, a set of people who are willing to stand up and not be embarrassed to say the words, stop child abuse, because so many people are embarrassed by that, and I completely understand it. It's because it's a horrific, ugly thing to think about. Nobody wants to think or talk about child abuse. It's not something people feel comfortable talking about because it's so personal. It's so ugly and disgusting to think about somebody doing something like that to a child. But fact is it's happening, and pretty much across the board, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused under the age of 18. And really that's the stats for all abuse. It's not just child sexual abuse, even though that's what mainly the people that you see on the websites to do with child sexual abuse. That is the stats. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused in some way sexually under the age of 18. Whether that's unwanted sexual touching, exploitation, child pornography, whatnot, being forced to watch pornography, this type of thing, to molestation, to rape, they'll be abused under the age of 18. That's pretty much the stats all the way across the board for physical, verbal, psychological, emotional abuse, as well as physical abuse, as well as sexual abuse and neglect. So pretty much 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused in some way under the age of 18. And the sad part is it's underreported. So it's even high. The numbers are even higher than that. And this is really sad. And it wouldn't matter if they were lower than that. Not one child should be abused. I don't care how many children be. It makes me mad that people would think, there has to be 250 trillion children being abused before we're going to do anything about this. It's like one child, not one, deserves to be abused. And it makes me angry that we are not putting more effort into this whole thing as a society to change this and get the programs in place that are going to help. $104 billion is spent annually because of child abuse. So why don't we just multiply that by 10 and take $1 trillion and stop child abuse? Well, no, nobody wants to do that. They'd rather just have a bunch of abused children dying at the hands of their caregivers and parents or whoever else gets a hold of these children, and or just ending up in the hospital with abuse-related injuries. And then, of course, they'll have to see all kinds of psychotherapists, therapists, and shrinks when they hit about 20, 30 years old because of all the adult survivor issues. I'm coming at you from a survivor point of view, right? And it's just absolutely horrific what people are doing, and they think it's okay. It's so justified by the abusers. The abusers have no problem with it. Yeah. You know why? Because they're not being abused. They're doing the abusing. So they have no problem with it. They can totally justify it. Society, they like to just hide it under the carpet. Let's just pretend it's not happening. Then we don't have to think about it. Yeah. In the meantime, these kids are suffering, and I know exactly what they're going through because I've been there. And it's very frustrating. It is absolutely frustrating. I wish we could stop it tonight. Sadly enough, there's not enough people involved to actually make that happen. But we need everyone's voice to stand up and say, look, child abuse has to stop. Let's get the funding going where it needs to go. Think tanks need to start thinking about this and getting huge think tanks in every community to find out what's going to work, how they're going to be able to help parents so that they don't lash out at their children or don't use them sexually, and different things like this. It should be common knowledge that you just don't abuse a child. But, hey, it just seems to be really common that people like to abuse children. That's what's going on. And people may find me offensive, but you know what? I really don't care. I was abused as a child, and it frustrates me to no end that so many people think it's okay. It wasn't okay. There was nothing okay about it. And so it is frustrating to me to think that people would accept it as acceptable behavior, and that society would think that it's okay for child abuse to continue on. Oh, who cares about these kids? Well, I do. I'm one person that does. And I know a whole lot of people standing with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children who are other advocates who don't even volunteer with us, who have their own advocate programs that they work with, who stand with us with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. And we do care. We care about every child out there, and we care about every survivor of child abuse. We do care. So contrary to belief, sometimes we don't have, like we can't offer any legal aid, that type of thing. We can just offer information and try to help people find resources. And also, if we can help you with information as far as pamphlets and getting the education and awareness out, then that we can do. We're just not lawyers, and we can't give any legal advice and things like that. But, we are out here, and we are another voice, and we are out here to educate the public on the signs and symptoms of abuse, how to report it, what to look for in your own family so that your children are not being abused. Make sure your own children are not being abused, right? So important. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I almost have like 11,700 shows listened to. That's getting close to 12,000 shows Yeah, 12,000. Like, that's a lot. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. So this website here, www.healthyplace.com, there's an article on here about psychological abuse, and it says, what is psychological abuse of a child? And this was written by healthyplace.com staff writer, November 23rd, 2008. But it doesn't matter when it was written. This is all good information that is just widely recognized, right? This is just information that comes from probably the National Clearinghouse on child abuse and whatnot, the real terms and the real what is considered to be kind of the law terms for different types of abuse, right? The terms that would stand up in court, and so that are recognized, So this is good information, and I think we should talk about it. Psychological abuse, right? This is psychological abuse is a pattern of intentional verbal or behavioral actions or lack of action that convey to a child the message that he or she is worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, or only of value to meet someone else's needs. Withholding emotional support, isolation, or terrorizing a child are forms of psychological abuse. Domestic violence that is witnessed by a child is also considered a form of psychological abuse. And, you bet it is, because it breaks down the child, you know what I mean? Being a parent or a caregiver, whoever is abusing the child psychologically, is conveying to that child that they're worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, only of value to meet someone's needs, withholding emotional support, isolation, terrorizing the child. These are all forms of psychological abuse, right? Domestic violence witnessed by a child, even if the child is not really directly involved in the domestic violence and they're not being physically abused, or it's just between the two caregivers or parents. The two partners who are raising that child, they will be affected by it. Psychologically very damaging for a child to witness domestic violence and abuse, right? So the psychological abuse is often divided into 8 categories defined as such, and that's rejection. It's the same with domestic violence, right? Rejection, scorn, terrorism, isolation, corruption or exploitation, the absence of emotional response, and neglect. And also the exposure to domestic violence is also part of it. So that's psychological abuse. Rejection, it says to reject a child, to push him or her away, to make them feel that they are useless or worthless, to undermine the value of their ideas or feelings, and to refuse to help them. That's rejection. Rejecting the child, pushing them away, making them feel that they're just worthless, just useless and no good, and undermining their ideas and feelings, just no care for the way the child is feeling, and refusing to help them with things, with anything, right? Refusal to help your child. I mean, that's wrong. And so many parents are like that. They're just like, oh, that's your problem. That's not my problem. Or they don't. If even sometimes the child needs medical attention and the parents just refuse to get the child medical attention. That was my case. My mom's medical problems and issues came first, always, because she was always near death, right? And sadly enough, she was very, very sick. And, I grew up in a very abusive home, and so there was always this question of whether my mom would live or die, and whether we would all live or die, because it was a very violent home. And so many times the children's needs were not met because everybody was focused on my mom as far as her physical needs went, because we all didn't want her to die, because we didn't want my dad to raise us. Even though my mom was very physically abusive and very violent and emotionally, psychologically abusive, almost all of us would have preferred to be raised by her than my dad. Right, because he was psychologically ill and he was mentally ill, and he was always talking about killing us and things like this. And one time tried to drive me and my sister over a cliff, and he was quite often talking about suicide and whatnot. So we all would have rather taken our chances with our mom, right? So we didn't want her to die, and also because she was being abused, and we knew that she didn't deserve a lot of the treatment that she got from my dad, and it kind of turned her sour. It turned her to be abusive towards us, a lot of it, because she was so out of her mind just from the psychological abuse from my dad that she couldn't take it anymore and just would lash out at us, right? So that's it's very, very hard on children. Psychological abuse, if they witness it in the home, even if they weren't direct targets, and they weren't really directly the one who was the abuse was being directed to, and it was just between the partners, the parents or the caregivers, it's still witnessing it is very, very damaging for children, right? And it does cause them to feel, that there's something wrong with them, that they're worthless. There's something wrong. That's why the parents are pushing them away, or that's why the caregivers are pushing them away, rejecting them and not wanting to help them, right? It's absolutely horrible, what people do to their children. Scorn is another one: to demean the child, to ridicule the child, to humiliate them, to cause them to be ashamed, to criticize the child, to insult them. That's scorn, right? To demean them, to ridicule them, to humiliate them. You're just things that parents and caregivers will do, or even other siblings. Look at you, you're just disgusting. You don't even belong in this family. Things like that. You're just an embarrassment to us all. Things like this that would cause a child to feel very humiliated and very ridiculed, and that they just didn't count. They can cause them to be ashamed of themselves, right? And to criticize the child, to insult them, so always critical, sometimes, maybe even comparing them to other siblings, saying, well, if you were more like your brother, or you should be more like your sister, and trying to make the other one look better than that child, right? That's very damaging. And insulting your child, like insulting children, is a horrible thing to do. Just calling them names and insulting them, running them down, calling them bad names, or telling them that they're fat, even when they're not, or saying things like, well, you're just stupid, or you're lazy, or, you don't matter to me, or things like this, right? Just very insulting stuff like that. That's very hard on a child, believe it or not. I lived like that. I grew up like that. So it was very hard on me, and it was hard on all of us, because I wasn't the only one in the home. There were 7 children, and we all went through that. Terrorism: to threaten a child or someone who is dear to him, right, or her, with physical violence. For instance, like to threaten a parent, to threaten the other partner that the child loves, right? It's terrorism. To threaten maybe a pet, the child might have a dog or a cat or something, or a little hamster, and then the other parent or whoever the abuser is threatens to kill the pet or harm the pet, or even to harm another sibling. That can happen too. Anyone that the child loves or cares about, that's who the abuser will threaten to hurt or do something to that person, so that the child will live in this fear, this terror, right? And I knew what that was all about, because I was concerned that my dad would kill my mom. And so I used to be at school. I was talking about this the other day on Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Elizabeth Brawley and myself were doing a show, and I just had remembered that I used to sit in class, and especially in elementary school, my younger years, and just be wondering kind of like if my mom would be alive when I got home from school, because I was always concerned that my dad would kill her. And so, I was always afraid that somebody would come to school. I always had these sort of things where I thought somebody would phone the principal's office, and then they would come and get me out of class, and they would be coming to pick me up to tell me that my mom had been killed. This was something that used to run through my mind. And it was a fear. It was a terrorism. This was something that would go on in my head because of what had been planted there. And it very well may have been something that my dad might have said to me, like, when you go to school, I'm going to kill your mom. I just don't know. All I know is I had a lot of fear and a lot of terror. My dad was very psychologically ill, and he still is. He's borderline schizophrenic and borderline personality disorder and manic depressive and lots of different things. So, he was not well when I was growing up, and he's still not well. And it's hard to be around people like that, because they do cause you a lot of fear, a lot of terror, right? And they threaten the child or someone who is dear to them with physical violence, abandonment, or death, right, saying that they'll kill them. To threaten to destroy the child's possessions is another thing. To place them in chaotic or dangerous situations is another one. To define strict and unreasonable expectations, so kind of expecting them, just treating them with all kinds of restrictions and treating them very strict and unreasonable expectations, expecting them to do things that developmentally they can't do. That is abuse, you bet. And to threaten them with punishment if they do not comply. And that's, parents are continually doing that. If you don't do this, I'm going to do that. So in other words, if you don't do what I want you to do, I will somehow punish you for it. I will make you pay for it. You know what I mean? It's got to be a better way. You know what I mean? To encourage your children to do what you want them to do, and it's for a reason. It's for a purpose. The minute you start using physical forms of violence, you've just lost every ability to control your child without hitting them. because the minute you start doing that, they associate the fact that every time you want them to do something, it's only going to end up in physical violence, and so why listen to you? There's no point. They know you. Chances are you're just going to hit them anyway. So a lot of times it pushes kids to actually go against what you want them to do, and they don't care if you hit them or not. As a parent, right? I've actually, that's me talking, right, from my own survivor issues, and as well as other people that I knew, other kids that I grew up with. And then other times, the other kids aren't like that. They don't, and the parents use more psychological stuff where it's like, we'll take away your toys if you don't do what we want you to do. And that wouldn't have worked for me because I didn't have very many toys, so it wouldn't have mattered to me, right? But for kids who, been kind of lavished upon with a lot of toys and, especially nowadays with computers and skateboards and all this cool stuff. Well, I had skateboards, but we didn't have computers. But TV and stuff like that might say, well, we'll take your TV privileges away for a month. I would have rather my mom did that than beat on me, to tell you the truth. My mom never took any privileges away. She would just abuse you physically, right? Like abuse me. She would never say, okay, you're grounded for, a week and there's no TV. She would just beat me up, right? And then that would be it. But of course, that's not good, right? It's not a healthy way to treat your children. It's very painful, I'll tell you that. And the thing is it doesn't teach you anything but the fact that, possibly you might hate your parents and that you don't understand why they're so mean and you shouldn't be treating you so harshly, and then you just go out and you do more terrible things because you just don't care anymore. After somebody does that to you for 5-10 years, you develop an attitude, right? So there's better ways to discipline your children without having to do these horrible things to them, right? And there has to be, and I know it because I've seen it in other people's families. I've seen it firsthand where other people knew how to properly discipline their children, and it works. There's just no, you have to, I always look at, kids with disciplinary problems. I always look at the parents because I'm like, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. You know what I mean? And they might be putting on a good show out in public, the parents, right? Or whoever the parent is or the caregiver. They might be putting on a real good show. But then when they get home, be interesting to see their behavior at home because they very well might be behaving a certain way that's causing that child to have these disciplinary problems, right? Mainly that's what it is, because unless the child has some sort of mental issues or some sort of psychological problems that the parents don't have, that the child ended up with, which can happen, sadly enough, right? Then, you have to wonder what the parents' behavior is, how the parents are behaving. Because children learn from their parents. Every child out there that you see that you would ever come in contact with are a direct picture, really, of their parents. So if you see a cool kid out there who listens and minds and has a good head on their shoulders but likes to have fun and seems to be developing quite well, chances are their parents are probably pretty level-headed and have a good sense of what they're doing and treat that child with respect and love and care, right? But when you see a child out there who's like out there running around in the middle of the night, spray painting things, cursing at people, breaking and entering into people's homes, and bullying other kids at school, doing drugs and self-injuring and threatening to hurt people, you can kind of guarantee that someone in their home has taught them how to behave that way. And pretty much. There's, and people don't like to admit that, but it's very true. Just about every person in my family, in my whole entire family, it was abusive in some way. Even brothers-in-laws and stuff like that. And they would argue and say, oh, no, I wasn't, but, they were. Not good influences, right? Not good influences at all for children to be around. So that's the thing, right? All this stuff does affect children. You bet it does. And I said here, isolation, to physically or socially isolate a child to limit their opportunities to socialize with others. That's a form of psychological abuse. You bet it is. Children need to socialize with others, with their own peers, as well as other adults. Children need to see healthy adult relationships is what they need to see. And they also need time to hang around with their peers. And, they shouldn't be isolated. They shouldn't be socially or physically isolated at all. And so when you see that is definitely abuse, right? Corruption or exploitation, to tolerate or encourage inappropriate or deviant behavior. to expose the child to antisocial role models, to consider the child as a servant, to encourage them or coerce them to participate in sexual activities. That's all corruption and exploitation, right? And that's just, that's so wrong, and it happens so, it's probably just crazy to think about how much of that actually is going on, and children are having to deal with, corruption and exploitation, a whole lot. And many people don't want to admit it, but it's very, very true. And so, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be abused sexually under the age of 18. That's just the facts, right? So we know someone is coercing them, someone's exploiting them. And who are these people? Aunts and uncles, cousins, friends of the family, moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas. And it's really pathetic and it's really disgusting. And it's not right, and it's got to stop, right? The absence of emotional response, that's another big one. To show oneself as inattentive or indifferent towards the child, to ignore their emotional needs, to avoid visual contact, kisses, or verbal communication with them, to never congratulate them. So basically, it's just the absence of all emotional response towards the child. Basically, they don't exist, right? And they're just there, And I grew up, in many ways like that. If I wasn't being physically abused, then I was being emotionally neglected, right? Because my mom didn't want everything to do with me. So, and when she did, it was violent, So, even verbally violent, right? So it's like, otherwise it was a whole lack of emotional response. She just didn't have any patience or strength to even deal with me, right? So it was hard. It was definitely hard. And it's horrible to think that children have to go through that. They're just ignored. Their needs are ignored emotionally, right? There's no visual contact. They don't care. There's no kisses. There's no hugs. There's no verbal communication. They're just either yelling at you or just ignoring you, one or the other, or beating on you. And they don't congratulate you when you do a good job, that's for sure. And, it might be, even if they do a small amount, they don't, they don't do it enough. So it doesn't matter. They might congratulate the child one time or something, and think that's good enough, right? And it's not. You need to encourage, parents need to encourage their children when they do something that the child feels is special, a picture they drew or, some piece of artwork that they did, the parents need to, or they did good on their school grades, just anything, that a child is working on that can help them to build their confidence that they did a good job in. Parents, very important for parents to recognize that and to not necessarily go overboard, but just to say, hey, good job, keep up the great work. You're doing so good. Just to encourage them that you see it, that you recognize it, that it's important to you because it's important to them, and they might not even realize how, that it's important to them, but they'd be happy to see the smile on your face as a parent, to be that way towards them, right? Instead of just pushing them away and, I don't have time for you right now, and, this kind of stuff that so many parents do to their children. Go watch TV, go away. As long as you're not bothering me, whatever you're doing, I don't care. And so many times children grow up like that, and that's not right. Neglect, it says to ignore the health or educational needs of the child, to refuse or to neglect to apply the required treatment. And, neglect is for psychological neglect, right? That's what they're talking about here, is, to ignoring their health, their emotional health, their well-being, their educational needs, their, the required treatment that they might need. If a child's suffering and having a hard time and just can't, is maybe developmentally delayed, and the parents just allow them to lag behind, that's definitely a problem. You know what I mean? And a lot of times parents just don't care. They don't care whether their children are doing well or not. It's all about them. And the sad thing is that once, parents really you don't want to lose yourself in the whole thing. It should be all about the family, not just all about the parents or all about the children, right? It shouldn't be either way. It should be all about the family, right? The whole unit as a whole. And so everyone's needs are getting met. And that's just so important, right? We have about a minute left, so thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate this. You can go and check the rest of this out. There's like showing a lack of regard for the child and saying unkind things to the child. Maybe we'll pick this back up on Friday. There is still quite a lot left here. That's what we'll do. We'll finish this up on Friday. So have a great night, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back on tomorrow morning. One child to be a survivor to another, and at 6 o'clock a.m., same time, same place. And if you need something, get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook or whatnot. I wrote a new book. It's called La Vida Juvies. It's my story, one summer with my friends, and it's really written for all teens who have been abused or who have experienced any kind of abuse or who know someone who's been abused. You can pick that up. You can pick that up from my website. Actually, I don't have it on any of my websites right now, but it's on books-for the number 4 teens.webs.com, and that's our new website for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Donna Shearer created that website for our books to deal with the teen issues of dating violence and teen dating violence and things like this. So be sure you can pick up a copy of my book, and I hope that it does help some teens, if they read that and they think, man, I can totally relate to this, that they would reach out and get some help and, really do whatever they can within their own abilities to let someone know that they are having problems and they're suffering in the home or whatever the issue is, to not suffer in silence and not allow themselves to go on a spiral downwards, so they can get their lives together, right? That would be my wish, So take care, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.